Welcome to the Vegan Transformation Book Club, Episode 3. I'm so glad you're here, whether you're joining me live or watching the replay. And if you are here live, I'd love for you to share in the chat where you are joining from at any time during this time we're together. And also if comments or questions come up, just feel free to share them in the chat. I'm going to dive into my slides, and there will be time at the end if there are questions or comments. So I'm wondering too, as I start to talk about today's topic, which is the healing power of compassion and also how we can hold compassion without burnout. If you are reading my book, The Vegan Transformation, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you read chapter 3, anything that really landed for you. So let's dive in. So compassion is something that is super important to me, but at the same time, I also recognize it can be difficult sometimes, especially for those of us who are naturally compassionate or empathic. So what I want to talk about today, and this draws on some of the research I shared in my chapter 3 of the Vegan Transformation about the benefits of empathy and compassion and the neurological underpinnings of compassion. And also what blocks our compassion, as well as what strengthens it. How do we cope when we're dealing with empathic distress, fatigue, or burnout, or just challenging emotions from feeling our empathy? And then there'll be an exercise at the end for expanding your circle of compassion in a way that is nourishing for you and also for those that you want to extend compassion towards. And again, those of you that have just joined in, please feel free to share, where you're joining from and any comments or thoughts that come up as we're going through this. So glad you're here. So first, I think it's helpful to understand what empathy and compassion are, just a foundation, because sometimes the terms are used interchangeably, but they aren't exactly the same thing. Empathy is when we're sensitive to or vicariously experience the feelings or thoughts or experience of another, so we can really feel with another person. And you might have heard that we have mirror neurons. This is wired into us so that we can sense what others are feeling and can relate to what they're feeling. And obviously, some people have more empathy than others, but in general, it is part of our human wiring. And then there's compassion, which takes empathy a step further. It's the sympathetic consciousness of others' feelings and distress, together with a desire to alleviate suffering. So there's actually a biological basis for empathy and compassion. I was finding it really interesting to learn that we are neurologically wired for empathy and compassion. I found as I was doing the research for my book that our brain, our pain centers in our brain are activated when we are feeling with another, when they are suffering or when we witness others suffering. And in addition, the amygdala, the part of our brain that processes emotions and detects threats, that also can be activated when we're feeling with another or sensing others' feelings. Now, compassion goes a step further, and it activates some different networks in the brain. So when we move from empathy to compassion, we engage parts of the brain that are associated with nurturing and connection. And also, it activates the reward centers in our brain. It actually feels good for us to be empathic and compassionate towards others. When we are kind to others and help others, it actually makes us feel better. And Charles Darwin was noted for saying that concern and caring for others is our strongest human instinct. So even though a lot of us might think that it seems that humans are more geared towards self-interest, his research showed that empathy and caring for others was our strongest instinct that helped us to survive. It's the empathy for a child that lets a parent and nurture that child and know how to help them. And it's empathy for others within our social system that help us all to flourish. So I note this because sometimes it might seem like our world is not so compassionate these days, but really underneath that, compassion is a part of our wiring. And there are a lot of benefits to compassion. This slide didn't show up right on the screen, but you get the idea. Compassion has actually been shown through research to benefit us personally. So when we're compassionate towards others, it actually has been shown through research to be linked to better mental health, better emotional well-being, better physical well-being for us. It's associated with less anxiety and depression and better relationships and more resilience. And we can be trained to be more compassionate too. Even if someone doesn't naturally experience that as much, there are ways that people can deepen their compassion. And compassion can be contagious. When we are compassionate, it can fuel compassion in others. And ultimately, as more of us are compassionate, it leads to a more compassionate society where we actually can care for the well-being of each other, animals, and the planet. So I guess the question is, what actually blocks our compassion? Given that we don't see, always people acting with compassion, and those of us that are vegan or on the path of veganism, moving in that direction, we've often come to this place of learning what happens to animals in animal agriculture and in many other industries, and we're just horrified just by how can humans do this to other sentient beings once we really connect with that. And so then we wonder, well, what's blocking other people's compassion? And what blocked my compassion before? For me personally, I was always a compassionate person. I went into being a psychologist and a psychotherapist, and I have always had compassion for others and for animals too. I have a memory of rescuing a grasshopper that was floating in a lake, by letting it jump on my raft and carrying it to shore. And I didn't even really at that age love insects too much, but just the compassion that I didn't want it to suffer. When I really connected with what happens to animals and animal agriculture, and then over time with other industries as well, once it really connected for me, once I broke through my disconnect and my social conditioning I'd had my whole life and really let myself see it and feel it, I just couldn't eat animals anymore. It changed my life. And I have to say for the better, even if sometimes it's also challenging. So I invite you to think about, how has compassion flowed in your life, before you moved on the path to considering being vegan, what blocked you before, and what's helped open you up now. And I want to share a little segment from my book that relates to this whole thing of what blocks our compassion. If you have the book, it's page 63 in the paperback. But I ask, what blocks our compassion? We are taught from a young age that compassion toward others, including animals, is good. But most of us also learn from the modeling of adults in our lives to limit our compassion to select groups or species. It's natural for children to be curious about animals and to enjoy spending time with them. Many children adore companion animals, like to watch animals in nature, and enjoy going to petting zoos. However, there's an underlying message, often unspoken, that some animals are worthy of our caring and compassion, while others are not. As children, we are encouraged in our love for certain animals while at the same time being served meals centered around the flesh, secretions, and body parts of other animals. And because the cooked meat on our plate doesn't necessarily resemble the animal that it came from, we may not realize that what we're eating is an animal. If we do make the connection and ask questions, our parents or other authorities in our lives are likely to respond by justifying the practice of eating animals, saying that we need meat and dairy to be healthy, or that certain animals are meant for food. In adulthood, we still might not make the connection between animal suffering and meat. The animal agriculture industry and other societal forces do all they can to hide and justify the treatment of farmed animals. In addition, our social conditioning, the ingrained message that eating meat is natural, healthy, or even imperative, can block us from seeking to learn about animal agriculture and how our food is produced, and block us from making more informed and compassionate choices in what we buy and eat. So there's a lot of factors that can be playing a role in blocking us. And, as you think about what has blocked you currently or previously, it's helpful to reflect on that and be aware, because it can give us more insights to perhaps the blocks that other people are experiencing as well. And so I think, along with that, there's emotional discomfort. If we acknowledge fully what's happening, it might mean that we have to change. And sometimes change is hard for a lot of reasons. Being forerunners in a society that is not at this point centered around plant-based living, we have to be willing to make some changes and, learn new things and be different. There's also just this way our system's set up. The choice architecture of our society is not set up around eating plant-based easily. We have to kind of be willing to be proactive. And we also, might be going against what seem like the social norms of our time, even though social norms do change, and that's so important, because there are things that were socially normative in the past that now we are horrified by, so just keep in mind, social norms change as we grow and evolve. And so as people moving towards compassionate living, you are a forerunner for what is healthy and sustainable, for our future. So how do we awaken compassion in ourselves and maybe supporting others around us? I think first we need to know there are those benefits of compassion, that it is healthy for us and for all, for compassion to be nurtured. And we have to be willing to be brave enough to bear witness to what others are experiencing, and to be able to navigate the emotions that come up when we do that. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment, but we can't have empathy if we don't bear witness to what someone else is going through. And so that means being willing to look at how meat is produced, to be willing to look at other industries and how workers are treated, how animals are treated, what happens, be willing to go deeper. And I think, when it comes to moving in the direction of vegan, getting to know farmed animals is super helpful. For me, going to Farm Sanctuary, which is in Watkins Glen, New York, about an hour and a half from where I live, and there's certainly many other farm sanctuaries that have come forward since then, but Farm Sanctuary in Watkins Glen was the very first. And you go there and you get a tour and you get to meet the different animals, the rescued animals that are there, and their stories, what they were going through before they came, what their life is like now. And you see them as individuals that each have personalities. So often I think in society, people think of pigs and they just see a group of pigs. They don't realize like each pig has a personality and preferences and social connections. And the same for cows and chickens. And they have so many unique qualities that make them really special. So when we get to know them, that can awaken compassion. Because I think the same is true for groups of humans that maybe we didn't know of people, but when we get to know them, we can have more compassion for them because we get to know, and connect with them and feel empathy with them. I think it also helps to have positive role models. Before I became vegan or vegetarian, I didn't have any role models for how someone would live that way. Before I went on this path, I just thought, what would someone eat or how would they do this? I didn't really understand the reasons. I didn't know how it would work. And I think as I read books and saw videos and listened to podcasts and found some role models online and through books, and then over time I got to know some, compassionate vegans in real life. And as I saw how they did it and that they were thriving and their life actually had expanded, it gave me courage to take steps forward myself, as well as learning, the little how to part of it as well. We need help sometimes to get moving forward. And it's also important to have self compassion. And again, I'm going to get a little bit more into that in just a moment. But we can hold compassion and empathy for others more fully if we also are including self care and self compassion for the feelings that come up for us. So here's the challenge of empathy. And this is especially true if you identify as an empath or a highly sensitive person. Although, really, anybody who experiences empathy can have this experience. And so, as I've mentioned, our desire to alleviate suffering and our empathy and connection with others are very healthy and admirable parts of our humanity. But sometimes we have to know how to hold these in a way that doesn't overwhelm us so that we can stay the course and not get burned out. Because sometimes, those of us that really repeatedly witness suffering, whether it be through our work, if we are caregivers, advocates, activists, or just people who, watch a lot of videos or news that relates to suffering, this can over time really kind of overwhelm us and even lead to burnout. And so first there's empathy overload or overwhelm. And that's just when we feel overwhelmed with what we've witnessed. So we might have seen, animals suffering from videos, or we might have seen other kinds of, violence or trauma that happen. And that just can lead to a lot of difficult emotions. And if we take in more of that than we're able to process or manage by, with tools that help us stay resilient, we might get overwhelmed and feel just sort of emotionally dysregulated, just angry or anxious or afraid or really upset or depressed, just different feelings can come up. And when we're experiencing empathy overload, a lot of times we're really identifying with the suffering that we're witnessing and feeling really helpless or powerless to do anything about it. And so when we have chronic empathy overload or overwhelm, this can lead to what we might call empathy fatigue or burnout. Now, sometimes this is called compassion fatigue, but what researchers and experts seem to be saying more and more now is that actually empathy fatigue, empathy burnout, empathic distress fatigue, these are better terms because it's more our empathy that's burning out than our compassion. The desire to want to help others, it's a different pathway in the brain that is more nourishing and sustainable for us because it's related to caring and kindness. But when we just simply feel with another and we feel helpless to change it and feel over responsible, that can really wear on us. And so we need to learn ways that we can hold it, hold mindful compassion and self-compassion that helps us not feel overloaded. So just kind of be aware if you've experienced, those of you that are already on the vegan path, or maybe caregivers or advocates or activists, and you've experienced numbness or disconnection or depletion and over responsibility. This could be some of what you might be experiencing. And self-care is so important. And there are, some good books and resources I can recommend also that might be helpful that I can mention in a moment. So I think those of us who are on the path of living vegan or moving towards veganism, we do need to include ourselves in our circle of care. We're so good at extending compassion to others, but sometimes we resist giving it to ourselves. We think, well, I need to give it all towards the animals because they don't, they can't express themselves in a way that humans hear them. Or, I need to put all my energy towards helping others. And that's really admirable, but you can hold space for yourself and others at the same time. And that's something that I guess many of us need to learn. This was something that I had to learn even as a therapist, because when we're caring for others, it can be heavy when we really care for others and want to help them. And sometimes we don't have power over all the things that we witness or see. There's things that are bigger than us. And so for me, learning to have empathy and compassion for myself was part of being sustainable in my work and now for the feelings that sometimes come up when I really am aware of the suffering in the world. And so it's holding space where you breathe into your own body and feel your own feelings. And from that, being able to extend compassion from a more grounded place. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So you probably heard the idea of putting your own oxygen mask on first. This is a phrase that's used a lot, but it came about because, on a plane when maybe the loss of air pressure happened and the oxygen masks come down, they're always telling mothers or others, put your own on first, because if you don't, if you just try to help your children first or the others around you first, you may pass out and then you will not be able to help anybody. And so it's similar to just how we care for others and animals and other beings. We have to make sure we're in a grounded place, or our efforts to help are not going to be as effective. And we might even become ill or not well where we can't really help. So some things to think about and, what it means to put your own oxygen mask on first. I think one would be knowing, where are your limits when it comes to watching videos or seeing disturbing images or social media posts or the news? I mentioned about bearing witness. I think it's important for us to be aware of what happens. And I've certainly watched some of those videos, and I watched the documentary Earthlings, which was like a real turning point that was heartbreaking for me, and then led me to be convinced that I had to be vegan. I'd been vegetarian up till then, and then that was sort of my turning point that I needed to be vegan. And so I think it is important that, just whether it be a documentary like Earthlings or Dominion, or a short video like Meet Your Meat, or other videos that are on social media, certainly we need to bear witness. But I think we also have to know our own limits. Once you are already on the vegan path, if you've witnessed a lot and you're overwhelmed, this might be a sign that you need to back off on some of the witnessing. Because once you've really connected, you don't necessarily need to keep seeing those videos. Maybe just now and then to remind yourself, but not constantly, unless your work requires that you do that. And that's sort of a different story, where you're going to have to learn some practices to help you still then to know where your limits are and how to care for yourself. But just kind of remember, we are limited human beings with emotional, physical, and spiritual needs. And if we don't care for those, our body lets us know. It's really basically burnout as a way of saying, hey, this is too much. I need not necessarily to shut down and not help at all, but I need to check back in with myself and what my needs are. So I think having regular self-care practices, and they're going to be different depending on who you are and what helps you. But for some people, having a regular meditation or mindfulness practice makes all the difference. Mindfulness helps us to witness our feelings and thoughts without over-identifying with them, so that rather than being totally carried off by our feelings, we can watch them and not just get totally overwhelmed or shut down. So that can be a huge practice, and on my website, I have, under my resources tab, so www.angelacrawfordphd.com, under resources, I have a meditation section where there's some audios that you can listen to. So including a mindfulness meditation audio. I think looking at our nutrition is so important. It's great there are so many vegan treats out there, and I certainly enjoy my share of those. But I did find in my research for the book that those who ate a more whole food, plant-centered vegan diet were able to navigate emotional challenges, I think, better than those that might have eaten the more junk food-oriented vegan diet. So just knowing that for your own health, physical and emotional health, eating a lot of whole plant foods as much as you um, can really be important. And the research shows that eating more fruits and vegetables, so even if you just increase your raw and also cooked fruits and vegetables, you're going to up some of your emotional well-being neurotransmitters. Sleep, of course, is important, getting enough sleep, and then just having positive activities. One of the people I interviewed for my book, and her story is shared in chapter 10 that's the chapter about thriving emotionally and socially with a vegan lifestyle. Her name was Ray, and she was an advocate and activist for animals and helped other vegans through her teaching. But she discovered the importance of self-compassion later on in her journey. She went through sort of a burnout kind of experience from witnessing some really tough stuff through her activism. And she finally learned that she needed to include self-care, and she needed to include time for joy and pleasure and fun. And that she had always been afraid of making time for that, like she wouldn't get things done or she wouldn't be doing enough. But ultimately, she found she was actually more effective when she created that balance in her life. So it's a learning process, and it's not always easy, but just, maybe blocking out a day or a time on your calendar where you do something that is just simply for you, that is simply pleasurable and enjoyable, like a hike in nature. Sometimes I have to remind myself, well, why does veganism matter to me? Well, part of it's because I care about this beautiful planet and all the beings on it. And so I need to go out and enjoy that beautiful planet sometimes in different ways to really reconnect with the joy of why this matters. We also need skills to process our emotions. Right now, I'm leading a program called the Vegan Resilience Intensive, and part of what we're going to be working in that is on those skills to process and regulate emotions. I'll also have some videos up on my YouTube channel in coming weeks that relate to that, so do keep an eye out. It's just an important skill because there's going to be tough feelings that come up, and we need ways to not just shut them down, but also not be overwhelmed by them, and how to work through them. A couple things to think about can be, first of all, just naming what you're feeling. Sometimes just the act of naming your feelings, that can be helpful for getting some distance from what you're feeling, so that rather than just being overwhelmed by it, you're more mindful in witnessing it. Also, things like journaling, breathing techniques, yoga, time in nature, talking to a good friend. These can all be ways that we process our feelings. I share some of these also in my Vegan Emotional Resilience Toolkit. If you don't yet have a copy of that, I have the link in the description below. So that also has a lot of tools for navigating some of the tough emotions. And then know when to seek help. In Defense of Animals is an organization that has a list of psychotherapists and other professionals that are vegan oriented or animal activism oriented. So I'll also put that link in the show description after I finish this, in case that's something you need more information about. So I want to do something called the loving kindness meditation, and this is something that you can find a lot of versions of online. I'm going to do a version that relates for those of us on this compassionate journey of living and moving towards a vegan lifestyle. And I'm going to add some elements where also we kind of try to bring it home inside of our own body as we're feeling compassion for ourselves and then extending it to others. So I'm going to just lead you in a guided meditation now. And after that, there is an opportunity, if there are any questions or comments or thoughts about what I've shared so far, I would love to hear, what has landed for you or thoughts or questions you have. So do feel free to share in the comments or chat anything you would like. But let's dive into the loving kindness meditation. So as you're getting started, you can close your eyes if that feels comfortable, or you can just soften your gaze and just slowly, look at a single thing, look out the window or just look down. And I want to invite you to just start by taking a few deep breaths. And just kind of breathe in slowly, sending the breath all the way down through your body, down into your hips, your legs, your feet, into the earth. Just feel your groundedness and connectedness with where you're sitting. And as you are sitting comfortably, we're going to start with sending compassion to yourself. Now, sometimes that is hard for people. Sometimes we find it easier to send it to others, but I'm going to just invite you to share it towards yourself first, because when we're coming from an open place and a full cup where we're, fully filled ourselves, we can extend it to others with more grace and more peace. And if it's hard to send it to yourself, one strategy that sometimes helps is imagine yourself as a child. When we send it to our child self, sometimes that's easier for people as well. So either way, sending it to your adult self, your child self, I'm going to say a series of phrases, and I'm just going to invite you to say the phrases silently to yourself. And I'll have you repeat them a couple of times. So just repeating these phrases silently to yourself. May I be peaceful. May I be peaceful. May I be happy. May I be happy. May I be free from suffering. May I be free from suffering. And you can add in a few other phrases like, may I be filled with loving kindness. May I be healthy. May I be safe. And sometimes it can help to put your hand on your heart as you're saying those, or on your cheek, or, rub your hands together. Just some kind of physical touch can help it kind of integrate even more. But just take that in for a moment. And again, you can also imagine sending it to yourself as a child, as a young child, if that is helpful. Just sending it to that younger self. May you be peaceful. May you be happy. May you be joyful. May you be free from suffering. And next, I'll invite you to think of someone you love or care about. This can be a human, it can be a companion animal, a friend, a child, a partner, just someone you care about. Picture their face and send the loving kindness wishes to them. May you be peaceful. May you be happy. May you be free from suffering. May you be safe. May you be happy and well. And you can imagine breathing compassion into your body, filling you up. And then as you breathe out, sending the compassion on your out breath to this person you care about. And then picture others that you care about, other people, other beings, sending loving kindness wishes to them. Picture their faces. You can do it one at a time or send it to several at once. Just picturing them and saying, may you be peaceful. May you be happy. May you be free from suffering. May you be safe. May you be healthy and well. And then Think about those that you might be concerned about in the world. Maybe you don't know them personally, but you hear about them on the news or some other way. Send loving kindness to those you know who are suffering in the world. May you be peaceful. May you be free. May you be free from suffering. Now, if you really want to deepen your practice, and this is not always an easy one, but think of some people or that you might have a difficult relationship with, or even possibly don't like. And this is a real deepening practice. You may not be ready to do it today, but I'm going to offer it because as we can deepen our practice, if we can send compassion even to those that we have difficult relationships with, it can really help us in ways that we might not even expect. So the way you can do this is to picture the person you have a challenging relationship with and just say, just as I want to be peaceful, may you be peaceful. Just as I want to be at ease, just as I want to be free from suffering, may you be free from suffering. And then last of all, extend loving kindness to all beings. Picture all of nature, all sentient beings, animals, humans. May all beings everywhere be peaceful, happy, and free. And just send that to all beings. May all beings everywhere be peaceful, happy, and free. And may the thoughts, words, and actions of my own life contribute in some way to that happiness and freedom for all. And you can come back to listen to this, or there is a version of it on my website in the meditation resource section on my website. Come back and listen to it and keep deepening into it. When you learn it well, you can even do it as you're taking a walk or just anytime you just need some calming for your nervous system. And once you're ready to bring closure to the practice, you just kind of take it all in, take a few deep breaths into your body, take a few breaths out to send it out to all beings, and hold the intention to bring the loving kindness into your actions today and your choices, and then come fully back into this space. So I'm curious, your reactions and responses to that. Please feel free to share what came up for you with that exercise. I'd love to hear. And I think whenever I've shared it with people or I've practiced it myself, it always does lead to a more grounded place of holding compassion that can help us be more sustainable. A reminder that if you want to go deeper into any of the things that we've been doing here in the book club, if you haven't yet grabbed your copy of The Vegan Transformation, I really invite you to do that. Next month is actually about finding meaning and purpose on our vegan journey. And I share in that chapter, it's chapter 4, about all the different ways that the people I interviewed for my book, how they have learned to find meaning and purpose on this journey that can really be quite life-changing. So we're going to get into this life-changing meaning and purpose on the vegan plant-powered path in our next episode next month, which is the last Wednesday of July. I'm going to double check what that date is. July 29th at 1 p.m. So I want to share a few takeaways from today. And before I do that, a comment in the chat from Lynn. As I've been vegan longer, it becomes increasingly difficult to know what happens to animals in agriculture. I can relate to that. I think as our empathy opens up and that compassion opens up, and the disconnect that has been so wired into us from our social conditioning, as that lessens, it can be really, really hard to look at it and know. And I do think that for most of us, we don't need to keep revisiting it, because as long as we're already living it, and in terms of making that choice not to harm animals, we don't need to keep going back and I guess, traumatizing ourselves with watching it or seeing it. I think what some people find is that from time to time they need to revisit it. Just it reactivates their motivation and their compassion. Um, but unless it's part of someone's ongoing work that, where it's unavoidable, I would say for most of us, if we can find ways to limit our exposure to things that are really traumatizing to us and just focus more on what we can do, I think that's helpful. And thank you, Lynn and Joe, both for sharing that you're enjoying my book. I really am so grateful for that. I think as it's been out longer now, I'm really discovering more and more that hopefully it can be a resource for us to thrive on the vegan path during times that can be challenging, so that this can really be more sustainable. So thank you for sharing that. So a few takeaways that I want to mention from today. One is that our compassion and empathy are wired into us neurologically, and they are beneficial parts of our humanity. And when we can expand our compassion to include ourselves, to include others, and to include more beings, all beings ultimately, this is healthy for us, and it's healthier for a more compassionate and sustainable and healthy world as well. Because as we are compassionate, we can have an impact on others and spread ripples that will help compassion to spread. Just as lack of compassion can spread, so can compassion. And finally, the third point is we need to include ourselves in our circle of care and have tools for how to navigate the feelings that come up, knowing our limits, including self-care. And so we definitely need some ways to care for us to hold compassion, especially when right now the world has not fully caught up with this compassion for all beings in terms of how things operate. And just in case you haven't yet also gotten my Vegan Emotional Resilience Toolkit, here's the QR code. There's also a link in the description. It has some tools for navigating some of the emotions that we were talking about today. So any other final thoughts anybody has? I'd welcome hearing from you. And I'm just so grateful for those of you that have joined me live, and others of you will join later. And I'd love to hear from you too in the comments, what your takeaway is or what really landed for you. So I hope you'll join me next month, the last Wednesday of July, for chapter 4, where we get into finding our meaning and purpose. And thank you, Joe, for that comment. And so glad you joined me here. We're going to dive right in again next time. And until then, just wishing you a great, rest of the day, and many blessings on your path forward. Thanks for being here.